Thank you for downloading from the BBC. For details of our complete range of podcasts and our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
The Egyptian novelist BahaaTaher has had a rocky relationship, to put it mildly, with his country's establishment. On the one hand, in the mid-1970s, the then government of Anwar Sadat effectively forced him into exile. And even when he was able to return, he was soon involved in a headline-hitting row about relationships between the current regime and the Egyptian Writers' Union. On the other hand, in 1998, Taher was given Egypt's highest literary award, the State Award of Merit, recognising more than 40 years' worth of critical writings, short stories and novels, the latter including Love in Exile, Point of Light, and the only novel available in English, Aunt Sophia and the Monastery. Set in the mid-1960s in rural Upper Egypt, this tells of a murderous blood feud triggered when a young man called Harbi kills Aunt Sophia's husband, an important local man, or bey, in self-defence. Although Taher grew up in Cairo, his mother's stories of the vendettas and beauties of her village childhood and his own experience of visits there weave in and out of the novel. When BahaaTaher came into our Cairo studio, he began by reading from Aunt Sophia and the Monastery.
Though many years have passed since that day, I remember it as if it were yesterday. I remember that it was a beautiful winter day, warm and sunny. It was like fall, when the sun's blazing heat lets up and a pleasant breeze blows, carrying no dust and no sign of a storm. It was a beautiful day also because the lentil plants, whose short green stalks covered the fields all along the road, had blossomed yellow overnight. They brightened the earth with their little yellow faces, a golden sea that rippled gently in the breeze, wafting their fresh, mild fragrance. All my life I have loved this scent and have never forgotten it, though those days are long gone.
Obviously, the stories that your mother and your other relatives told you about village life have gripped your imagination, but I wonder how you regard that village existence, because although blood feuds aside, there is a sense both of great strong community but also of a lot of nosiness, of neighbours knowing exactly what everyone was up to, about everyone being related. Do you look at it as a kind of rather blissful life, or as a really rather hellish one?
I think it is both anyway, because sometimes I miss that very much. I miss this kind of communal life, which everyone knows everything about you and you know everything about the life of all other people. And sometimes you feel it like a kind of intrusion in your own life, and it's not very comfortable. But if I have to choose, I would choose this kind of life than this kind of urban life where I don't know my neighbor and my neighbor doesn't know me.
One thing that surprised me as a non-Egyptian reader was that the two groups of people in the novel who live in the village, the Muslims, who are most of the villagers, and then the Christians, the Copts, this old Egyptian sect of Christians, they are both united over several things. Well, actually, it's not merely unity, it's also a sort of respect for each other's religion. It would be insignificant to say it was tolerance. It's not that. They both accept each other. I mean, is that really what it's like in Egypt between the Copts and the Muslims?
Yes, I have been asked also this question before. And the question insinuates sometimes that people don't believe it was like that. No, it was very much like that. And
you say
and it is. And it is to a very great extent also. I remember very well when I was a child, and this I portrayed in the novel. I used to visit my sister who lived in the village, who married there and who lived there. And just next door to her there was a monastery. And I used to move quite freely into the monastery, and people in the monastery used to move also exactly the way I'm describing it in the novel. And there were no closed doors. I mean, people were mixing together without any reservation. And if I try to explain how for so many years this kind of thing existed, and how, because of a very small minority, the picture seemed to change. It would take me a very long time to try to explain that.
Instead of that, then, I wonder if you'd read another bit from Aunt Sophia in the monastery. It concerns the moment at which the young man, Harbi, finally is pushed to kill the Bey, because the Bey, who's developed this delusion that Harbi wants to kill his own baby son, decides to torture him and tortures him very badly, and ties him to a palm tree in order to do this. And finally, Harbi just can't take it any longer.
Harbi, whose skin had been stripped away and whose blood was now flowing from every part of his back, legs, and arms, gave one great cry as he flung himself forward, his pain alone giving him the strength to do so. The tall palm tree shook with the violence of his movement, and the ropes that had bound him broke as he screamed the word, "Enough." Quick as lightning, he bent down, untied his feet, and seized one of the men's rifles that was lying on the ground. With it, he prodded the Bey in the chest, still shouting, "Enough! Enough!" until finally he fired one shot into the Bey's heart.
I find that really quite moving. I mean, it's that enough, because obviously Harbi doesn't want to kill this man at all and just feels he has to. That galvanises, that action galvanises lots of things, not just Aunt Sophia's desire for vengeance, but also the cooperation between the narrator's Muslim father and one of the monks living in the monastery to protect Harbi. He goes to live inside the monastery so that he's in a kind of sanctuary. This act of both compassionate and sensible, practical cooperation in order to avoid violence, how far would you like us to read that as some kind of symbol or political allegory?
If it could be understood as a political message only, I would be very sad. I mean, I wanted it to portray the real way of life in the village. And I was in Luxor only a couple of weeks ago. I was taking part in a kind of a seminar or something like that. And then after the seminar, there came a young man to me to ask me whether this story was a true story. Did it happen? I knew about it and I wrote about it. I said, no, it is purely fictional. I know life in the monastery very well, but I have never known a thing that happened like that. He said, because in my village, that is in the other bank of the Nile, the West Bank in Luxor, and a story exactly the same action took place there. I mean, there was a vengeance, and there was a Muslim who took refuge in a monastery, and I told him honestly, I have never heard about that.
Well, of course, you're right that the novel doesn't read simply as a political book, but I mean, obviously, your work is capable of seriously ruffling political feathers. I mean, what was it you actually did to annoy President Sadat in the 1970s?
I'm still asking myself this question until now.
You must have some idea.
Yes, I know, of course. Because during that time, the Minister of Culture spoke about intellectuals. And then Sadat didn't like at all people from the left. So his Minister of Culture during that time, he said, those who are not with us are against us. And he said, those who are not with us, they better stay at home. This was supposed to be a great favor, because that's meant they just stay at home. We are not going to put them in prison, yes? But I didn't stay at home, because they saw red everywhere during that time. Because I was not with them, they considered me leftist, Marxist.
And what did they do about it?
They just asked me to stay at home. I was having my income from this kind of work, translating and publishing articles and stories. This was forbidden. I was forbidden from doing that. I lived on a nominal position and with a nominal salary. That wouldn't be sufficient to support me and my family for 1 week. So the technique at the time was to let you live like that for a while until they are sure you are completely penniless, and then they would ask you to come back. They would offer you a very good job with a very good salary, with, of course, one condition, that you be with, not against, yeah? Mm-hmm. Somehow I didn't like this. I didn't accept it. I was offered this kind of solution after several months of life without any kind of income, yeah? The only thing to do was to try to search for some work outside, so abroad, I mean. So, since I pretend that I know English and French, I presented myself to some examinations for the United Nations and for other non-governmental organizations, and I worked for 5 years or 6 years as freelance translator. That gave me the chance to be all over the world, from Africa to Asia to America. It was a very nice time anyway, thanks to Sadat.
Being away from your own country, being in exile, however semi-voluntarily, what was the immediate impact of that on you as a writer?
I didn't write a word for some 3, 4, 5 years, because I felt cut off from the source of my own inspiration, if you want to say, from the society I know, from the people I know. So I didn't write for a long time, and when I began writing after that, I thought the only thing to do, for a while at least, was to write about the problems of someone like me, an immigrant to a European country where he is not at all a welcome guest, yeah? So I wrote Last Night I Dreamt of You, and I wrote other short stories. From another point of view, it was a good experience, since what I wrote about life abroad, life in exile, if you want. For some people, they think that the best thing I have written, for instance, was this novel, Love in Exile, which is speaking about an immigrant living in Europe.
Well, sadly, Love in Exile isn't available in English, but I wonder if you'd read for us from one of your short stories about exile, called Last Night I Dreamt of You.
I go to work in the morning and return home in the evening. This happens 5 days a week. It happens in a foreign city in the north. When I go out in the morning, I frequently find a blonde girl at the bus stop with a beauty spot on her cheek. When she sees me coming in the distance, she immediately turns her face away. She never looks me in the eye, no matter how long we have to stand there. When I get home after work, I turn on television and turn it off. I turn on the radio and turn it off. I walk around in the empty apartment. I rearrange the pictures on the wall and the books on the shelves. I wash the dishes. I talk to myself in the mirror. Night falls.
Your exile stories aren't only about that kind of unanchored restlessness. They're also quite often about perception-changing encounters. I'm thinking, for instance, of a story called In an Unusual Park, where the Egyptian narrator finds himself in this European park, which has been set aside purely for dogs to be walked in.
And he comes to know an old lady there taking her dog to this park. And at the beginning of this long short story, there is some kind of mistrust between the old lady and between the young man. But as things develop, as they start to speak each one to the other, and they begin to understand and to know, the story ends with both of them telling the other his most intimate stories about his life. I mean, if people come or can understand each other, this kind of mistrust can be overcome. That's at least that's what I was trying to, or what this story is trying to say.
Several of your stories, although far from all, have been translated into English, but merely one of your novels, Aunt Sophia and the Monastery. What's the process, if you're a writer in Arabic, of getting translated into English?
Oh, please tell me.
It's difficult, is it?
I don't know. Anyway, normally you sit quiet and you wait if a publisher is offering you to translate this novel. But it's not that easy, and even if it is translated, it's not easy for it to be published, and even if it is published, it is very difficult for it to be widely read. It took the poor Naguib Mahfouz some 50 years of
the
hard
Nobel
work.
Prize-winning Egyptian novelist.
Yes, you have. Yes, it took him 50 or 60 years of working very hard, writing intensively, to be translated and read, but not everyone has this chance, yeah.
How crucial is it, because obviously there is a large Arabic readership, how crucial is it to be translated into English in terms of world recognition?
I don't think it helps a lot. I don't think it helps at all, because as I told you, publishers, not in England or in America or in France or anywhere in the West, they don't welcome literature from the third world, let us say, from the third world, since writers from the third world are not considered to be first-class writers. So if they are publishing works from, for instance, for a writer from Ghana, from Egypt, from anywhere in the third world, there is never the kind of publicity that a book normally receives if it is written by a Western writer. And also, sometimes they don't pay any royalties at all. So I don't think it is very helpful for writers themselves. Maybe it could be very helpful from the cultural point of view, that it might help people to understand each other. It might help people in the West to understand people in our part of the world, the same way that reading Western literature and culture helped us to understand the European culture.
In Cairo, in Egypt, are there places where writers can get together and support one another and exchange ideas and so on?
Oh, of course. The cafes. I mean, I have even written something about those cafes in Egypt. There are even a kind of specialization. There is a Café Riche that is for the classical or established writers. There is another cafe next door which is for postmodernist writers. Yes, I'm not joking. It is like that. There is a third cafe for poets, cafes for novelists.
If you happen to be, say, a postmodernist poet, are you allowed to move from cafe to cafe?
There are some neutral places, no man's land, like the Atelier, for instance, where everybody can quarrel with the other there. But you cannot intrude the cafe of the postmodernist if you are classical. No. You would be very badly treated anyway.
Since you've returned to Egypt, you've talked a bit about some of the themes that have affected you while you were in exile, the fact that you were thinking back to your earlier life and so on. But since you've been safely back in Egypt, what are the themes that are mainly preoccupying you?
Trying to understand the change. I mean, life changed so much in Egypt during those 20 years I have been abroad that it is as if I came back to a new country, a country which I don't know very well. And then when I started to write, I posed a question. What happened? What caused this kind of change?
What are the most noticeable changes to you?
I told you, and in a kind of nostalgia when we started this interview, how people mixed together so simply and were very sympathetic to each other, and were living in a community. Now people are no longer like that. I mean, what I noticed when I came back, when I was trying to explain to you how I'm living in a building of some 80 flats, and I don't know even 2 persons in this building. For me, I cannot find this old Egypt when I used to knock the door of my neighbor to ask him for the simplest thing, or he had the feeling that he can do that. So that's what I'm trying to understand. That's what I'm trying to write about. My last novel is all about that, what happened in relations, for instance, between the elder generation and the new generation, where there is a gap of misunderstanding between both.
How free do you feel these days to ask questions about your society?
Oh, you are free to ask any kind of questions now. I mean, that's not because there is any advance in freedom of expression or anything of the sort, but because, like the French say, I'm sorry, I cannot find it does not come to my mind the English equivalent of that. Ils s'en fout.
They don't give a
They don't care. They don't care. They don't give a damn. Say whatever you want, and they will do whatever they want. That's what's happening in Egypt now. I mean, censorship is not as it was before. You can write, say whatever you want.
Is that because they feel that no one in Egypt reads?
Also, that the reading public is not 1/10 of importance of television public. Huh? So
does that
make...
They
don't care. They don't care. They don't give a damn, as you said. Say whatever you want.
Is this finally this carelessness of the governments in terms of what is written, what you write? Do you feel mostly that this is a liberation, or do you feel mostly that this is a tragedy?
It's a tragedy. For personally, because some writers speak about the freedom of expression, that we have never had the chance to write as freely as we do now, which is true. We can write anything, we can say anything. You can attack whatever establishment, whatever institution in the country. But what is the result? Nothing at all. I mean, when I was living in the 60s, you could hesitate writing a line because you don't know how the censor would interpret this, yes? But this line, if it was published, it did have an impact on the readers, and they understood, and you could go to prison for that, yes? But it was a price to pay. But now you can write a whole novel from the first page to the last page, saying nothing but insults and criticism, and nobody cares. So it's a tragedy. For me, it's a tragedy anyway.
There are dozens of different podcasts now available from the BBC, including news, documentaries, science, business, arts and sport. For details of them all, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.